Ryan Davis hesitates at the doorstep of the Burnage Agency, the dimly lit sign above flickering like a heartbeat. With a click of the door, his life veers into the unknown, a realm of sharp minds, darker motives, and the inescapable weight of his past. As he steps inside, one question looms: who really brought him here? And why? It was one of those nights where sleep seemed like a distant memory. Ryan Davis sat hunched over his laptop in the glow of its screen, mindlessly scrolling through tabs. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, just something to distract him from the memories that wouldn't stop replaying in his head. That's when the ad appeared, bright and out of place on his screen. Are you ready to rewrite your life? Visit the Burnage Agency. Ryan blinked. The words seemed to leap off the screen, as if they were meant for him and him alone. The image of a serene beach at sunset, coupled with the strange familiarity of the ad's tone, stirred something deep within. It wasn't like the usual spam he ignored. This felt personal. For a moment, Ryan debated closing the tab. He'd been scammed enough times to know better. But then he remembered the look in Jessie's eyes, the pain, the betrayal, the way she hadn't been the same since that night a year ago. The guilt weighed heavy on him, crushing in its silence. Maybe this was the universe's way of throwing him a rope. Without letting himself overthink, Ryan grabbed a notebook and scrawled down the address that flashed briefly on the screen before the ad disappeared. He sat back, heart pounding. Was this a sign or just a random coincidence? Either way, he had to know. The next day, Ryan found himself standing in front of a weathered building that didn't seem to belong in the bustling part of town. The sign above the door flickered faintly: Burnage Agency. The letters were chipped, and the whole place looked like it had been pulled out of a noir film. Ryan hesitated. The building seemed old, forgotten, but somehow alive with an energy he couldn't place. He glanced around, half expecting someone to stop him, to tell him he didn't belong here. Instead, the street remained eerily quiet, save for the hum of a distant car engine. Just as he raised his hand to knock, the door creaked open on its own. Ryan froze. For a second, he thought about turning back. This whole thing felt absurd. But the same pull that had drawn him to the ad kept him rooted in place. He stepped inside. The air was warm, heavy with the scent of old books and faintly burnt coffee. The walls were lined with mismatched paintings, each more unsettling than the last. It was as if the room itself was studying him, waiting to see what he would do next. Before he could take it all in, a voice broke through the silence. Ryan Davis, it said, smooth and welcoming. He turned to see a tall, sharp-eyed man standing in the doorway of an inner office. "Welcome. We've been expecting you." Ryan's stomach churned. How did this man know his name? He hadn't introduced himself, hadn't told anyone he was coming. Yet the man stood there, smiling like an old friend, as if Ryan's arrival had been planned all along. "Ryan Davis," the man repeated, stepping forward with a confidence that bordered on unsettling. He extended a hand, his grip firm and warm. "I'm Max Burnage, founder of this little operation. And yes, I know you're wondering how I know your name." Ryan hesitated before shaking his hand. "I saw the ad, but I don't understand how." "How I knew you'd be here," Max interrupted, a small smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. "It's simple, targeted marketing. You'd be amazed what the internet knows about you, Ryan. But don't worry, we're not here to dig into your private life. You came to us, remember?" Ryan blinked, trying to process the calm way Max spoke, as if it were normal to predict someone's actions before they made them. The man was tall, his dark suit tailored perfectly, yet his demeanor was oddly welcoming. It was the kind of presence that made Ryan feel both comforted and on edge. Max gestured to a chair near his desk. "Come in, sit down. Let's talk about why you're really here." Ryan hesitated, but curiosity won out. As he sat, he noticed the office was as strange as the man himself. Shelves overflowed with old books, files, and odd trinkets, objects that felt like they each had a story to tell. Behind Max's desk hung a single painting of a stormy sea, the waves crashing violently against a jagged shoreline. Before Ryan could ask anything, a woman entered the room with a tray. The woman moved with practiced ease, balancing two large mugs of steaming tea. She looked to be in her 40s, with kind eyes that seemed to hold 1,000 untold stories. "Here you go," she said, placing one mug in front of Ryan. "You'll want this." Ryan stared at the tea. The aroma was unfamiliar, earthy, almost floral, with a hint of something he couldn't place. It wasn't the kind of tea you'd find at a grocery store. He glanced up at Max, who was already sipping from his mug. "Drink," Max urged, his voice soft but insistent. "It'll help." Help with what? Ryan wanted to ask, but the words didn't come. Instead, he lifted the mug to his lips and took a cautious sip. The warmth spread through him instantly, easing the tension in his shoulders. It was strange he hadn't realized how tightly wound he'd been until that moment. As he set the mug down, the woman Sally, as Max later introduced her, gave him a knowing smile and left the room. Ryan felt a flicker of unease. This wasn't just tea. It was something more, though he couldn't figure out what. Max leaned forward, his hands steepled under his chin. "You're probably wondering why we served you tea before we even started talking. It's simple. Every journey needs a moment of calm before the storm. And believe me, Ryan, your storm is coming." Ryan felt his pulse quicken. "What does that mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Max didn't answer. Instead, he smiled enigmatically and leaned back in his chair. As the silence settled in the room, Max reached into a desk drawer and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. He tapped one against the box, lit it with a flick of his wrist, and inhaled deeply. The scent of burning tobacco filled the room, blending oddly with the earthy aroma of the tea. Max leaned across the desk, offering the pack to Ryan. "Care for one?" Ryan shook his head almost instinctively. "I don't smoke." Max chuckled, as though he'd expected that answer. "Neither did I. Not until I realized sometimes you have to try something new to shift your perspective." He held the pack out again, his expression unreadable. "Go on. One won't kill you." Reluctantly, Ryan took a cigarette, feeling the weight of it in his hand. It was strange, holding something so small yet so significant. Max lit it for him, and Ryan inhaled cautiously, the smoke biting at his throat and lungs. He coughed, his eyes watering, but the sensation was oddly liberating. "Not bad, huh?" Max said with a smirk. Ryan shook his head, his voice hoarse. "Not sure bad is the word I'd use." Max leaned back, his gaze steady. "You know, smoking's not really the point here. It's about stepping outside yourself, breaking habits. That's where the real change begins." As Ryan took another hesitant puff, he realized Max wasn't talking about cigarettes anymore. There was a deeper meaning to his words, something Ryan couldn't quite grasp but felt compelled to explore. The cigarette burned low in Ryan's hand, a thin trail of smoke curling into the air. He stared at it for a moment before speaking, his voice low and hesitant. "A year ago," he began, "my wife Jessie and I went out for her birthday." Max didn't interrupt, letting Ryan find his own pace. It was supposed to be a great night. Dinner at her favorite restaurant, a walk by the river. We were happy, or at least I thought we were. But on the way back to the car, these two men came out of nowhere. Ryan's voice faltered, the memory clawing its way to the surface. They attacked her. Right there on the street. I tried to fight them off, but I couldn't. They were too strong." He paused, his hands trembling. "By the time it was over, Jessie was on the ground, barely conscious. They just walked away like nothing happened." Max's expression didn't change, but there was a subtle shift in the room's energy, a heaviness that pressed down on Ryan. "She spent weeks in the hospital," Ryan continued. "Physically, she recovered. But emotionally, it's like I lost her that night. And maybe she lost me too." Ryan's voice broke, the weight of his confession pulling tears from his eyes. "I should have done more. I should have stopped them. But I didn't. And now, I don't know how to fix what's left of us." Max leaned forward, his tone calm but firm. "Ryan, let me ask you something. Do you believe you failed her? Or are you afraid she thinks you did?" Ryan looked up, startled by the question. He didn't have an answer, not yet. The room was silent, except for the faint crackle of the cigarette in Max's hand. Ryan wiped his eyes, embarrassed by his show of emotion, but Max didn't seem to judge. Instead, he leaned forward, his gaze piercing yet oddly reassuring. "Ryan," Max began, his voice measured, "what if I told you there's a way to rewrite this story? To undo the damage, to make things right not just for Jesse, but for yourself?" Ryan frowned, skepticism flickering across his face. "What are you talking about? There's no way to change what happened that night." Max held up a hand, silencing him gently. "I'm not talking about time travel, Ryan. I'm talking about perspective, choices, healing. The Burnage Agency specializes in helping people like you, people trapped by their own pasts, unable to move forward." Ryan leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "So what is this? Some kind of therapy session?" Max chuckled, shaking his head. "Not exactly. Therapy's about talking. We're about doing. We guide you through the steps you need to take, no matter how unconventional, to rebuild what's been broken. But I won't lie to you, it's not easy, and it's not cheap." The mention of money made Ryan hesitate. "How much are we talking?" Max waved the question away. "The cost isn't important right now. What matters is whether you're willing to take the first step." Ryan stared at him, torn between curiosity and doubt. "And what's the first step?" Max smiled, but it wasn't the warm, welcoming smile from earlier. This one was sharper, more enigmatic. "Trust. You trusted us enough to come here, but now you have to trust yourself. Think about it, Ryan. When you're ready, we'll take the next step together." Ryan felt a chill run down his spine. There was something both comforting and unnerving about Max's words, as if he already knew the decision Ryan would make. Ryan left the office that day with more questions than answers. Over the next few days, he couldn't stop thinking about Max's cryptic proposal. It gnawed at him, the idea that maybe, just maybe, there was a way to reclaim the life he'd lost. When he finally returned to the Burnage Agency, Max was waiting, as if he'd known Ryan would be back all along. This time, the conversation was more direct. "The Burnage Agency," Max explained, "isn't just about solving problems. It's about uncovering truths. You'd be amazed how much power comes from understanding the real story behind your pain." Ryan furrowed his brow. "What does that mean? You're going to dig into my past?" Max nodded. "In a way, yes. But it's not about the details, it's about the patterns. Why did you react the way you did that night? Why does Jessie look at you the way she does now? These are questions most people are too afraid to ask themselves. We'll help you find the answers. But you have to be willing to face them." Ryan hesitated, the weight of Max's words sinking in. "And if I'm not?" Max's expression softened, but his tone remained firm. "Then nothing changes, Ryan. You go back to your life, back to the same pain and guilt. But if you're ready to move forward, we'll be here. Just know that the answers won't always be what you want to hear." The room seemed to close in around Ryan as he considered the offer. He realized this wasn't just about Jesse or that night, it was about him. His choices, his fears, his inability to let go. For the first time, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't in a long time: hope. Ryan returned to the Burnage Agency a week later, nervous but resolute. He'd spent the past days grappling with the idea of confronting truths he'd long buried. Max greeted him with his usual enigmatic calm and led him into the inner office, where an unfamiliar device sat on the desk. "What's that?" Ryan asked, his voice tinged with apprehension. Max gestured to the machine. "This is part of what we do here. It's not a lie detector, but it works similarly, measuring your emotional responses as you recount key moments from your past. It helps us pinpoint the real source of your pain, even if you're not consciously aware of it." Ryan hesitated, his palms sweating. "So you're just going to hook me up to this thing and dig through my memories?" Max nodded. "Something like that. But remember, Ryan, the machine doesn't uncover anything you don't already know deep down. It's just a tool to help you see it clearly." With a deep breath, Ryan agreed. As he recounted the night of Jesse's attack, the machine beeped and whirred, capturing subtle shifts in his voice and body language. Max asked probing questions, each one cutting deeper than the last. Why do you think you couldn't protect her? What did you feel when she looked at you afterward? Do you believe she blames you? Ryan's responses grew more fragmented as memories flooded back the helplessness, the shame, the unspoken distance that had grown between him and Jesse. Then Max asked a question that stopped him cold. What did Jesse say to you that night? Ryan froze. He'd tried to block out her words, but now they came rushing back with brutal clarity you didn't even try. Tears streamed down Ryan's face as he realized the depth of his guilt. But Max wasn't finished. Ryan, he said gently, what if I told you that her words were born out of her pain, not her truth? Would you still carry the blame? For the first time, Ryan began to see his torment in a new light. The next session was unlike anything Ryan had experienced. Instead of focusing on the past, Max guided him toward the future. You've spent a year punishing yourself for something you couldn't control, Max said. Now it's time to take control of what happens next. Ryan worked through exercises designed to rebuild his confidence and reconnect with Jesse. Max introduced him to visualization techniques, helping him reframe his memories not to erase them, but to see them through a lens of compassion rather than self-reproach. But the real turning point came when Max handed Ryan a letter. This is from Jesse, Max explained. She came to us before you did, Ryan. She wanted help too. Ryan's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Jesse's handwriting was familiar yet shaky, as if she'd written it through tears. The letter wasn't an accusation but a confession. She admitted she'd lashed out in her pain, blaming Ryan because she couldn't face her own fear and anger. She wrote about how much she missed him, how she wanted them to heal together but didn't know how to reach him. Ryan read the letter twice, then a third time. By the end, he was crying again, but this time the tears felt lighter, almost freeing. Max placed a hand on his shoulder. This isn't the end of your journey, Ryan, but it's a start. You have the tools now to rebuild what you thought was lost. Ryan left the Burnage Agency that day with a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't fixed, but he was no longer broken. Thank you for joining us on Ryan's journey. If you found this story as moving and thought-provoking as we did, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. And if you want more stories like this, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. See you next time.